Cole Brown. Cole Brown. I'm going to say it twice. Remember the name. You're going to hear a lot of it.
What is this book about? It's about growing up Black in white spaces and all of the many things that entails, trying to discover one's own identity when surrounded by dissimilarity. I am half Ethiopian on my mother's side, but very Americanized. I'm American, but also Ethiopian. I grew up in the cities, but I was also born in the Midwest. And also I'm Black, but come from a place of privilege. And all of these things are seen often as competing identities. And the book is sort of charts my journey, trying to embrace all of those things within one body, and understanding that they don't have to contradict each other. Given the education that I was given sort of in a formal way, there's an entire literary canon that is Black literature that I would have largely missed had my parents not been very intentional about supplementing that education. So they knew that school was not going to be enough. They knew that they were sending me to this sort of, in our environment, a prestigious school that still was not going to give me everything I needed. So as you mentioned, they both sort of orally, particularly from my pop, I'm thinking of now, who you would have read about, who I love dearly. Sort of the oral storytelling that I received from him, and then the written storytelling that I received from both of my parents, shaped how I understood we tell our own stories. When I was growing up, I felt as though the people that I grew up around had a very limited view of what Blackness was or could be. So many of the traits that I would have learned in my environment, as anyone else does, existed outside of that very slim view of what we believe Blackness was.
Even in these spaces of inclusion, in these spaces of seeming liberalism, there was still a large grappling with what it meant to be particularly Black in that space. And I think being mixed added to it, I come from a family in which we've always been extremely proud of our heritage and always learn more and more about it. But at the same time, it meant that there was almost a culture shock and shift to realize that the values that I grew up with that were imbued in my house, that meant that I was unquestioningly proud to be Black. It wasn't until I stepped into the world where I was like, oh, people take issue with this.
So much of the Black narratives that we're fed in the States are so often one of also an intersection of class and race, but of a lower socioeconomic status and race. And that was really the point, as I mentioned earlier, was trying to introduce a portion of the Black experience that I know exists.
You keep getting these reminders, despite all that you have in common with your white classmates and your white friends. You keep getting these reminders that you're not like them. Yep. From microaggressions to comments that you say are based on ignorance to incidents that make it crystal clear. And one of those was the party at your friend Erin's house. Can you tell, how old were you when you went to that party? Tell us about it. What happened?
Yeah, I think that was the summer. That was the summer going into 11th grade, I want to say. And so it's from a chapter called House Party in the book. And I was at the time about to be an upperclassman. This was my first upperclassman party. And my close friend Bradford and I went to this house party at our friend Erin's house. And we were the only two Black kids at that party. And it was at a time in my life when I was beginning to drift towards the Black table, which is, the table in our lunchroom where all the Black kids sat. And I was beginning to drift out of, a friend group that I had. Anyways, we get to this party and everything is going fine. I'm a bit awkward and uncomfortable at that house party, but it's all good. And then the cops show up. and the cops showing up was not sort of out of character for our party. So we were ready.
But
We were ready to
how
run.
rowdy was this party?
It wasn't that. Actually, what we ended up discovering later was that she wasn't. Apparently, they had sold the house or something. She wasn't supposed to be throwing a party. There wasn't supposed to be people in the house. So the neighbors end up calling the cops because there's people in the house. Cops show up, we think to just shut down the party, but they're under the impression there's a robbery happening. And quickly things get really real. Like, it goes from us at a house party, then us trying to run from the cops, and then all of a sudden they have accosted us, put us on the ground, just Bradford and I, drawn their guns.
Just the two black party goers.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. There, in at least in the room that I was in, there was cops in other parts of the room, but we talked about that party several times with my classmates and so forth thereafter, and I didn't hear anybody say that the cops had drawn guns on them. And
they drew guns on the two of you.
Yes. And Bradford and I were on the ground, and they're pointing their guns above our heads, and it's important to say that, like, we were so fortunate to have gotten out of that situation. We got out of that situation in part because of the privileged context we were in. It was clear to the cops that the parents that were represented in that room of kids could cause real trouble for them in their careers, and they end up giving all of us a slap on the wrist. That said, we see regularly these days how that could have ended much more poorly for the two of us. And it was a terrifying time, but also like a stark representation of that entire dynamic, that we are Black in this space, and that those will be sort of contentious forces for us in this world. It was just a stark image of kind of that entire experience.
So tell me, I mean, this is in front of your white friends.
Mm-hmm.
What would that feel like? What did that do to your relationships afterwards?
As I was mentioning, it came at an interesting time because I was drifting out of this white friend group that I didn't feel really saw me anymore. Like, didn't there all these jokes about.
What do you mean?
It's just like I felt out of place in this friend group at that point because I didn't feel as though they understood that I was now a Black man operating in this world. And so there would be jokes around race or things that they would do that they wouldn't invite me to and so forth. And I knew, even though sort of no one was racist, like no one was like saying to me, whatever, something explicitly racist, I knew that I was uncomfortable and being treated slightly differently because of my race. So it came at an odd time because, Bradford and I were the only Black kids in a space that was all of those white kids, and trying to figure out, I think it was kind of a marker that told me, okay, it's time to move lunch tables. It's time to embrace this. These kids over here, Bradford and the rest of the kids at the Black table, who are to this day my brothers, they see you. They understand the experience of what you're feeling walking through these hallways, and you need to embrace that.
So you're at this elite, overwhelmingly white school, and a lot of the Black kids eat lunch together in the cafeteria. And you write of your decision to walk across the cafeteria to intentionally join the Black table.
Yeah.
Why was the Black table so significant in your life at the time?
Yeah, it's probably almost strange to hear, a 25-year-old man talk about his lunch table in high school as much as I do. But I really can't overstate the importance here. I don't think that anybody that grew up in a school similar to the one that I went to, sort of a private white high school, I think is probably familiar with the institution of the Black table. This was not particular to my school. and it's exactly what it sounds like. The black table was a specific table in the corner of the lunchroom where all the black kids sat. And we, like, the table itself was the black table, but we were all the black table too. People would refer to us as the black table. And when I made that switch, what they did for me, I mean, like, we were all in a space that was not built for us. Like, that was not constructed with us in mind, and it felt that way. It felt like the social order was not built for us to be within it. And what we did with that black table was we carved out a little space of our own. You know, like for 45 minutes or whatever it was, none of the other stuff mattered. Like, you know, we joked and laughed and were loud and were ignorant, but also dealt with, you know, real stuff that was really happening in a lot of our lives. And what they did for me was give me a space to sort of digest and work through many of the issues that we're talking about. You know, when something happens like what happened at Aaron's house, it was the black table that I'd go to on Monday and unpack it, and, you know, and try to understand what had just happened. So I can't overstate it. I mean, what they did for me was incredible. And like I said, to this day, I'm close with all of them.
And the reaction of the white kids at the school to the black table, what was that?
Yes. The running joke, this really happened. The running joke that week was that Cole had gone back to Africa, which is like, that's where we were. like that was the running joke that week, which actually, and I think I mentioned this in the book, in his own right is impressive, because they didn't teach Marcus Garvey in history class, so I don't know where they would have picked that up. But I think that many of the white kids sort of treated it as its own, exactly how we treated it, like almost its own sort of sovereign island within that institution, not to be gone near, but we loved it dearly, and it shaped our experience.
Being in that space in between pushed you into a pretty bleak space for a time. It sounded, in reading the book, like you kind of stumbled into ending it all once. But the second time, you truly thought about ending your life?
Yeah.
It was painful. That was painful just to read. So I can imagine what it was like to go through.
Yeah, it's tough at this point. It's difficult to just, to parse out how much of that is Cole being the only black kid in this space, how much of it is just teenage angst, how much of it is, some of the family stuff we had going on at the time. Those are hard. That's a hard thing to tease out at this point. But I know that there was a not insignificant portion of it that was because I just felt alone. Like I said, I hadn't seen myself in the world that I existed in, and I think that was just difficult for me to grapple with. So yes, twice, and once, you're right, sort of a bit more intentional than the other. Things came very close, and I have nothing but sort of my own ineptitude and God's grace to thank for it not being a very final act.
Well, great art comes from great pain. So we all are extremely happy that you stuck around so you could put it on the page.
Thank you.
Was writing this cathartic?
Absolutely. Incredibly cathartic. That chapter in particular, I think that this book was a 4-year process, and I think that the book existed in some form without that chapter for probably 2.5 years before I finally decided that it needed to exist. It was kind of floating for a long time out here, and I just wrestled for so long with whether or not to contribute it. I did because I felt that it was an honest part of the experience, and I wanted this book, if nothing else, to be honest. And I knew that there were probably other kids, if I had felt that way, there were other kids that hopefully that would resonate with. But the process of unpacking that, in order to put that on the page, there's a chapter on dating. There was a lot of unpacking that happened there in order to put that on the page. Relationships with my parents, all of that stuff. I think in order to write about anything, you need to understand it. And getting to a place of understanding for all of those topics was a difficult one, but incredibly cathartic and definitely worth it.
Well, you talk about being vulnerable when we just started this conversation, and it's very clear. You make yourself very vulnerable on these pages, but I also think that's what makes you approachable. That you are telling us how you felt, and we have all felt like this before. I tell you one thing that probably resonates with a lot of your Black readers is your musing about the difference between Black and white parenting.
Yeah,
I could hear a chorus of got that right. People recognize that. One of your stories, I'll tell you, my mom was the sweetest woman on the planet. But if I had told her to shut up, let alone shut the F up,
right,
she'd have slapped me into the middle of next week.
Yeah. Yeah. I gotta say, I gotta jump in because I gotta say that when I was doing the interviews, there was no topic that there was more agreement on than Black parenting. It was hilarious. I would talk to people, I'm talking to somebody that lives in California and someone that lives in DC and someone that lives in Boston, and all three of them are telling me like almost verbatim the same story. About exactly what you're talking about like, I called Mr. So-and-so by his first name and I got my butt whooped when I got home. Like that story existed in so many forms that I just knew it had to make it into the book.
Like I said, I know your mom, and when you quote her as saying, "Do I look like Eric's mother?" I can hear her saying,
right.
I can hear her
exactly
saying,
right.
Because every Black
exactly
mother
right.
has said that, every last one.
Absolutely.
So also tell me about Leroy and Oscar.
Yeah, so that's Pop I love dearly. Pop is my paternal grandfather, as you know, and was my paternal grandfather. And Pop and I were very close. And some summers when I was very young, my parents used to send me to Fort Wayne, Indiana to spend time in Pop's house. And those summers were tough because Pop was tough. Like Pop was, they don't make him like Pop anymore. I mean, he was a cranky old man that loved me like nobody's business. And we had a great time during those summers. But Pop with the things that he was going to spank me with, he would name them so that he could threaten me in front of white people without them, without raising alarm in them. So he would like he named the fly swatter Leroy, he named the newspaper Oscar, he named his belt something I can't remember. And the line would be, if you're acting up in the grocery store or something, the line would be, Cole, do you want to go meet Leroy? And the answer is no, Pop, I don't want to go meet Leroy. So I wrote an essay about that when I was, I think, a 10th grader at Penn Charter. And to me, that was hilarious. Like, my pop was about to pass away. His memory was so, near and dear to my heart at that point, particularly, that writing this essay I thought was like a funny thing. And it really raised alarm in my teacher. And it just speaks to like the, elements of Black culture not really translating across cultural lines. Without getting into it, it just became a whole ordeal. And I talk about it in the book where, she basically thought I was being abused, and the administration got involved. It was just this whole thing. But it was a hilarious example of exactly that, of just Black culture not, falling on deaf white ears. But I love Pop dearly.
We used to call my father the fastest belt in the East. You could get that belt out so fast before.
Yeah, that's funny because I swore Pop was that. Maybe maybe their tenures didn't overlap because I swear Pop had it quick. He was quick to it.
Well, this is a quick turn, but from something funny to something tragic. Tell me about your friend Martise.
Yeah, so Martise, I'm not sure I would call a friend. I have met him, but Martise was a victim to one of these incidents of police aggression that was in the news. It was national news at one point. He was a UVA student, and he got beat up really bad outside of UVA bar for, I think he was like, he tried to get into the bar with a fake ID, as many college students do, and ends up getting beat up really bad by UVA police. And the video, I think part of the reason that it went viral and became national news is because the video is like really graphic of him basically cursing at the police and saying, let me up, let me up. And he has blood sort of covering his face. And in the book, I talk about police brutality and how I, as a Black person in white spaces, attempted to grapple with those examples as they were happening. You know, the Trayvon Martin incident happened when I was in high school, and what that meant in terms of my, like, that had literal effects on my day-to-day life, what I was and was not allowed to wear, where I was and was not allowed to go. So I try to unpack that a bit. But the Martise one was a particular incident just because it happened while we were in college and he was at UVA. Like, it wasn't, it wasn't some example that we could sort of in our minds separate as being over there. I was at Georgetown, he was at UVA, and he got the crap beat out of him by the cops. And I think that really shook up my and many others' sense of security and safety in that world.
So Cole, you are an excellent writer. And in the chapter Reveal, you write about a white kid on an opposing high school soccer team who spit on you and called you nigger, and that your affluence, your education, your white friends were no shield. And you write this passage, which I thought was beautiful. There is something quintessentially token about the experience of abrupt disillusionment. Raised in a coddling environment, repeatedly assured of our exceptionalism, whimsical notions of universal justice become us. For those not so coddled, inequity seeps in day by day. Its lessons are learned gradually in ways both big and small. The reveal is a more sudden thing, a tidal wave of understanding. It is a bone-cracking crunch, proclaiming loudly that discrimination does not discriminate. So, such wise words. So tell me, how have you synthesized all of this, and what space do you inhabit today?
I think that part of growing up in general, nothing particularly token about this, is learning how to be comfortable, learning how to live in this world and understand that sort of I am enough. I know that that's a bit perhaps obscure, but I guess what I'm saying is that so much of the book describes my entering spaces and not feeling as though I belong, not feeling comfortable in those spaces because of the many competing half identities that I am comprised of. And I fortunately for my own sort of sanity and health and life have transcended that part of life. Like I'm on to the next chapter, which is I'm comfortable. I'm good. I can be in Sydney, Australia without a damn Black person on this entire continent, I have recently learned. And I'm good. I'm comfortable. Just as I am, when I'm in Pop's house in Fort Wayne and Aunt Spud's house in West Virginia and Grandma's house in Ethiopia. I think that getting to adulthood requires embracing the all of you, and fortunately I've gotten there, and I have the book process to thank for much of that.
One last thing, in the age of Trump and Black Lives Matter, is it hard to maintain that well-earned equilibrium?
I think it's hard for for any of us to stay sane in the time of Trump and Black Lives Matter. You know, like I you know, that equilibrium in terms of understanding and embracing who I am. No, fortunately it hasn't, but certainly, particularly just the Black death that is shown so regularly, so casually, nonchalantly, flippantly on TV screens. I think any of us, all of us, are attempting to grapple with what that means and what it means about, you know, the country that we love. So it is a difficult time, no doubt, but I think that's a shared difficulty.
Well, Cole, I could talk to you forever, and we'll pick this up again this summer, I hope.
Yes. Yes.
But before we go, can you tell everybody where they can get a copy of Grayboy?
Yes. So the full title is Grayboy: Finding Blackness in a White World, and it's sold everywhere books are sold. So certainly Amazon or Barnes and Nobles. Hopefully your local bookstore. If it's not there, go by and check and ask for it. But yeah, they can get it everywhere books are sold, and the support is so incredibly appreciated.
Before we go, we have a poll question that we would like to ask everybody to respond to. The question is, have you ever felt caught between multiple identities, as Cole describes in his book, Grayboy? Please answer this, and we'll have the answer for you shortly. So I'm going to pass this back on to George. And Cole, thank you very much.
Thank you. This was fantastic, Uncle Bill. This was awesome.
This was awesome.
Man, just wow. Like that, the authenticity from the questions to your answers, Cole, incredibly powerful. And you said towards the end, adulthood is where you learn to embrace all of you. Man, that's something that I'm trying to do every day. You know, like I'm not even 21 yet, but we got to. And then you even spoke to the vulnerability piece too in middle school, when you begin to really feel that difference in you, like you're now the first Black kid in middle school. And I definitely identify with that. Just to speak to my own middle school experience, you know, it was hard. It's such a shock, you know. You expect all your friends are the same, you know, similar ideals, similar values, similar pastimes, and then all of a sudden it sort of just shifts and you don't really know what to do. But that support system that I heard you had really, really helped throughout that whole navigation. Extremely powerful.
Absolutely. And
this poll question, I identify with it as well. I feel like everyone of color can really just sort of see themselves in that, or go back to a space or a time where it was difficult to navigate or solely identify as one thing, when Blackness is everything in itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Man.
Absolutely. How did we do on the Q&A? Did we get any while Uncle Bill and I were talking?
Yeah, no, you got a lot.
Cool.
You got a lot, which is awesome.
Let's see how many we can get to in the time we have left.
All right. So we have Greg from Portland. How would you identify the racial/ethnic backgrounds of your Georgetown classmates that became your closest friends? Did you feel welcomed by faculty, staff, and students?
Yeah, Georgetown was a much different environment than the one that I grew up in. I think that Georgetown was, I mean, people, I guess it depends on who you ask, people would be reasonably critical of Georgetown at times for the level of its diversity. I felt it was incredibly diverse. And in my friend group, if you were to look at my friend group from Georgetown, you'd be seeing a pretty broad swath of, like, not even just American, globally, the population. I had Black friends in Georgetown. I had friends from every continent at Georgetown. And I did feel embraced in that community. And I think that it was exactly what I needed at that stage in life. Not everyone feels that way, but that was my experience.
Mm. Now we have another question. This is from Auntie Yvette in California. From your perspective, How can white people be better allies to Black colleagues? And can Grayboy be leveraged as a tool or resource to help?
So one, hi Anivet, thanks for coming. But I think that to answer them in reverse order, can Grayboy be leveraged as a tool? I I certainly didn't write it as a tool, but hopefully it could be used as a tool. I think that Grayboy talks about a particular experience, and if you're in a corporate environment, it talks about the experience that likely many of your Black colleagues had. And so to that extent, to the extent that you would like to understand better the Black colleagues that you work alongside, hopefully it is a tool. How can sort of in the corporate environment, white people be better allies? But yeah, I think everybody has a different answer for this. Mine is that I think you need to wrestle with. I think everybody, but particularly white people and sort of the dominant caste in America, need to wrestle with the narratives they've been fed, the way that they think they understand the people that we sit alongside. And I think that that's the responsibility of every human on this earth. But if you are in a position of dominance, you need to wrestle with and question the narratives about Black people, about Black history. One way to do that is by reading Grayboy, but there is of course a much broader literary canon of people that could be added to that list as well.
That's real. That's real. Now we have one from Somisha from California, the Bay Area. When the party incident happened, did any of your white friends act as an ally during this incident? Was this incident, quote, the final straw and making you gravitate to that table with the Black kids, quote?
Yeah, I think that I had it probably completed my gravitation towards the Black table. I think that had started much earlier, but there was less flip-flopping after that point. I guess that in that particularly intense moment, it would have been hard for anyone to sort of be an ally to me. I mean, there was guns involved. It was just dangerous. But certainly afterwards, like I don't want to paint Penn Charter white folk with a broad brush, because some of my closest friends ever, some of the wokest individuals I know, and they're listed in the book as well, are Penn Charter white folks. So I definitely had a couple. I had hard conversations the following week with the kids at the Black table, but I also had hard conversations with one or two people I'm thinking of in particular that were just really good friends to me throughout that time, but particularly after that incident.
Okay. And I did want to share the poll results. We have about 105 people that said yes. They have felt that they've been between multiple identities, like you said in Grayboy.
Yeah.
Extreme.
Yeah, I think that speaks to what Uncle Bill and I were talking about earlier, just that even though this is specific in particular, there's also parts of it that are universal. And no matter your experience, if you have had the experience of feeling caught in between identities, hopefully you see some of yourself in the book, no matter whether or not those identities are the ones that I was, caught between.
Now we have another question from Auntie Gail and Uncle Ian. Moving forward, how would you define your mission? You clearly have created the opening for incredible dialogue. Love and miss you from California.
George, it's pretty obvious to me that you're picking all the ones from the Bay Area. George is from the Bay Area for anybody watching. so there might be some bias, but hey, Auntie Gail, I moving forward, what is my mission? I think that my mission is to do exactly this, make sure that sort of a broader range of Black stories are told. There will at some point be another book. Don't hit me up asking about it. It's on the way, but there will be that. But then also, hopefully, I'd love to see that this book be adapted on screen in some way as well. And all of those efforts are really just to try to tell a broader diversity, a broader range of Black stories. I think that, like I said, life was made more difficult by not seeing an array of options for Blackness on the screen. And I'd love to try to, in a very small way, not tell all of our stories, but just the ones that I know well. I'd like to try to correct that to the extent that I can.
Very real, very real. Now to diversify, we got Sam from Philly. What was your mother's reaction after reading Grayboy and the tough subject matter incorporated? And has it changed at all as time goes on, or how much of it was new information to her and your sister?
So I think that a lot of it was new information. Well, maybe not a lot, but certainly, some of the more difficult moments were definitely new information to both my mom and my sister, and my dad, really everyone that reads it. And we had some difficult conversations, my mother and I. We continue to. I think that they were necessary conversations, but the Uncle Bill and I talked about a chapter that speaks about depression in the book, and I think that would be hard for any mother to read about her son. So I think that she wrestled with it at times, probably in a different way, but in some ways similar to the way that I wrestled with it. And then we had some really honest conversations about that subject matter, and continue to. And the same goes for Faith. Faith wrestled with it, and fortunately, we've been able to have some grown-up conversations around it.
All right. And we have one from Victoria Barfield and her 5 sisters. Can we quote Gray Kids? Can we quote Gray Kids get the people around us to see us differently? And if so, how do we do that?
That's my little cousin Victoria. She's not so little anymore, and her many sisters. I think that that's the wrong way to ask the question. I don't think that it is the responsibility of Victoria and her sisters or anybody else to get people to look at us differently. I think that the better question to answer is how can I get to a place where it doesn't matter? Like how can I get to a place where I inhabit this body in this world fully and confidently, and that's much more important. And then the way that those people, whoever those people are looking at Gray Kids, is totally inconsequential at that point.
We have another question from Carol Penn. Hey Cole, wonderful book and great interview today. What would you have wanted to be different? What do you think can be done to make, quote, white spaces work better for Black children?
What would I have wanted to be different? I guess, one answer to that question is nothing, because I feel good about this journey that I took. I certainly feel good about the destination. Like, I feel good about where I'm at in life right now. And I think that it would not have been possible without the journey that I went on. But so I guess that's sort of for my own particular life. But in terms of, making those spaces a bit easier on Black kids, I think that, what is done to try to create community is such important work around Jack and Jill and other spaces like that. I think that that's important work. I do wish that in that space I had been told our stories more. I know I keep coming back to that, but I just think it's so important. Not really in Jack and Jill, more so sort of in the private school system. I wish I had seen, that the fact that Black people existed before slavery and also existed, between slavery and Martin Luther King, and then existed between Martin Luther King and today. Like, there's just these gaps around, and so much of that education was either as a result of it not being in that space was either handed down from my parents or like just self-education in the time since I left high school. And those stories are just so important. You know, the fact that so many of the writers that influenced me, that I, you know, cherish, Toni Morrison and Richard Wright and James Baldwin, and you know, so many of these were just never shared in those spaces. You wouldn't have even known it existed. And I think that it would be helpful for me in terms of how I look to the world, but it's also helpful for the white kids in that space to better understand how I look to the world, you know? So I think that's a piece that was missing.
Yeah, it is not our responsibility to share that, isn't it? Man, no, that's real. That's very real. We have another question. Leslie from Berlin. Hi, Cole. Wow. Congratulations. I love the discussion of the Black Table. There was definitely one in my high school as well. Did you have any faculty members at your schools who supported Black students, or who introduced the Black perspectives in the classroom? Or was it the Black Table the only space where you and your peers were affirmed?
Yeah, I think that's so important. And Leslie, you can tell that Leslie grew up with an experience similar to mine, because that's kind of an insider question. You gotta know that space to ask that question. And the answer for me is yes. There were teachers in that space that understood and tried to uplift, you know, the Black kids, and tried to support the Black kids in that space, and understood that it could be tough, that it could be difficult to be Black in that space. So I was fortunate there. You know, there's like well documented. There's an entire chapter that I cut out of the book that would have been one of the last chapters in the book. And one of the points it tries to make is that like there's well documented evidence. I mean, this is like studied that Black outcomes are much improved by having a Black teacher at some point in life. I you know, that too, the influence of that can't be overstated. And I think some of them are on this call. So yes, I did have that support system, and it was incredibly important. I'm sure we're probably coming to the end here. Do we need to wrap up, or we have time for one more?
I think we have time for one more, and this is a good one to wrap up as well. So this is from Philly, from Monique Braxton. What advice would you give to a 7th grade Cole?
Man, I like ditch some of those losers you were hanging out with. But better than that, I think that some of the struggles that I paint in the book were from 7th grade. 7th grade is just like such a pivotal year in I think a kid's development, and it really was for me. And I think the advice, this is the advice that I give kids when I talk to them these days about the book, is just that like this will end, like this too shall pass. You know, like I think that it's hard to, that seems like simple advice, but I think that it's so hard oftentimes, particularly when you're in some low moments, to understand that like high school and middle school don't last forever. This thing is temporary, and even if even if you don't like how you're negotiating this space right now, there will be a new space, and that horizon is a better one. I think I needed to hear that in those years, because there were some low moments there where that didn't necessarily feel like it was the case.
Keep moving forward. That's all we can do.
Absolutely. So before we wrap, I want to say a thank you, because I have a lot of people to thank. Of course, you and Uncle Bill, but the many aunties that are on this call that made this dream happen. I owe such a large debt of gratitude to all of them. So thank you so much. And then also, of course, the family members that not only made this call happen and are tuned in, but also sort of created the experience that I was able to write about. I love all of you dearly, and I'm just so happy that they've joined on as well.
Man, well, thank you for having me being a part of it. This is inspiring, to say the least. And thank you all so much for attending and engaging in this inspiring book launch. You all will receive a link to the video recording of today's launch in a couple of days to share with friends and family. And I'd like to remind everyone to make sure you visit colebrown.com to check out all of the exciting activities Cole has going on. And if you like what you heard today and can't wait to read more, you can head straight to Amazon and purchase the book. And thank you all again.
Awesome. Thank you, George. This was great. Talk to you soon.
Man, peace and love.